Thank you, Last Cloncorla, and I would like to move the motion now for second reading. Last Cloncorla, I would like to bring before the House, on behalf of the Labour Party, the Land and Conveyancing Reform Review of Rent in Certain Cases Amendment Bill 2010. And in doing so, acknowledge the members that will be joining us in the gallery this evening. I understand representing 50 different retailers across the country with an employee base of over 15,000 employees. I also understand that in the public gallery this evening joining us will be members of the trade union movement, which I think in their joining of both groups in the public gallery this evening extends and demonstrates the type of concern that actually exists in the retail sector regarding this matter. To begin, I would like to say that I'm sharing my time with Deputies Willie Penrose and Deputies Arthur Morgan. Agreed? Okay. Last Cloncorla, if I might begin by asking, why is this measure needed? The purpose of this bill is to recognise the serious burden placed upon businesses throughout the state arising from the current decline in the economy when faced with upwards-only commercial rent reviews. Right across Ireland, shops are going out of business in virtually every village, town and city in the country. Last year, this issue was only partially addressed in the Land and Conveyancing Law Reform Act. However, changes with regard to the abolishment of upward-only rent reviews only apply to leases which had been agreed in the last week, and no application to existing business leases set prior to that date are actually affected by that bill. At that time, during the debate last year, the Minister said, and I quote, "It is important the House sends out a strong signal to the market, and particularly those ranked in commercial premises, that it is better to get some rent than no rent at all. Putting people on the street is in no one's interest." Minister Ahern continued during that debate, "I believed it was right for the Oireachtas to send a signal to exhort landlords to be as reasonable as possible in cases where traders were locked into, for example, a 35-year lease with upward-only rent reviews. I wrote to all professional bodies in the property sector to exhort their members to deal reasonably and rationally with such cases. That was then. This is now." The signal clearly was not heard, and rents have continued to increase. And rents have increased to such an extent that I was reading an IMF report published at the start of this year that is showing that commercial rents in Ireland are amongst the top 3 in the world, higher than cities like Tokyo, and I believe even higher than cities like Milan. Now, given that rents are at such a level and we're in the midst of possibly the greatest economic recession this country ever had, one has to ask the question, why are rents so high? And the reason why rents are so high is because it's legally not possible to actually reduce them. So it's now clear that this measure must be dealt with on a legislative basis, given the emergency of the situation we now find ourselves in. So what will the bill do that we are bringing before the House this evening? The bill I bring before the House this evening recognises the crisis we are in and the need for emergency measures. The bill empowers the government in the public interest by order to grant temporary relief from the operation of existing upwards-only rent reviews. In summary, the bill will publish an emergency period, or will establish an emergency period, during which it will effectively prohibit the application of upward-only rent review clauses in business leases, which will only apply to existing, or which will both apply to existing as well as new leases. Last Cloncorla, the retail sector is the largest public sector employer or private sector employer in the economy. It represents over 24,000 stores and employs almost 280,000 people. Yet, in 2009, there were 30,000 job losses at a cost of €60 million to the state. In January and February of this year, there have been 30 insolvencies, and additionally, 120 unlimited retailers have failed in the same period, in the first 2 months of this year. Retail sale figures, also for that period, were down, and we see them continue to drop. In fact, in the last 2 years, the cumulative drop in the retail sector has been 30% in business terms. Yet, crucially, rent as a percentage of the operating costs has increased beyond 20% for many shopping centre tenants, while their sales continue to implode. Yet, in this collapsing market, Landlords protected by an upward-only rent review measure are looking for increases in rent in shopping centres such as Drum here in Dublin by 60%, the Pavilion Shopping Centre in Swords by 100%, the Monaghan Shopping Centre by 46%, and in my own constituency of Cork South Central, the landlord of the Wilton Shopping Centre is looking for increases of between 36 and 58% from hard-pressed tenants. This small sample represents an unrealistic worldview in which landlords are actually ignoring economic realities and seeking extraordinary increases in rents. It is also becoming evident that the most exorbitant increases are being sought by property developers and property owners who are headed towards the NAMA process, perhaps hoping that an increase in rental yields will increase their NAMA valuation. It is now beyond argument that the commercial property market is not a market. In a real market, demand meets supply and a price is derived. However, in the Irish commercial property market, there is an oversupply of retail property and an under-demand for it. Yet rent prices continue to increase. And as I referenced in the IMF report, rents go up while more property becomes available and businesses go to the wall because they can't pay these rents. A more appropriate description is that the Irish retail market is in fact a rental bubble, just like its near relative, the property bubble. Sustaining this rent bubble means that the single greatest cost facing businesses in the retail sector, cost greater than energy costs, supplier costs, and most importantly, employment costs, is meeting an unsustainable rent on a quarterly basis. In fact, one email I had received over the last number of days, like other members in the House, had somebody quite very distressingly saying that what they're doing now is that they open up their business every morning to pay their rent, yet they're losing money hand over fist. So they're in a financial bind that they must open their company to trade in order to lose income. Because if they don't, under the legalities of their existing lease agreement, their landlord will pursue them for their rent. And that is just a sample of some of the emails that I received. One from the chief executive of Cleary's, a Dublin-based company, says we are all aware of the very serious situation facing many progressive Indigenous businesses, particularly retailers and their staff, who have been caught in an upward-only rent system that clearly does not work. Throughout the Tiger years, this community was one that accumulated wealth, but one that spread it to the far corners of society. The last time we had such a crisis led to the formation of the Land League, and other many land reforms ensued. Another email from Ciaran Lynch in Navan, County Meath, no relation. The application of an upward-only lease clause on my lease has just resulted in me closing my shop with the loss of 6 jobs. We are now working hard to try and relocate our business to an alternative premise so we can continue to honour our financial commitments. I will probably lose my house as my landlord has now instigated litigation to recover the lease interest. From a company that has been an Irish success story in recent years, Butler's Chocolates Cafe, and an email from Colm Sorensen, their managing director. We are an Irish manufacturing and retail company based in North Dublin and employing 250 people. We operate 14 shops throughout the country. Throughout 2009, our management and staff have accepted a wage freeze and many of our suppliers have reduced their prices. The only cost that we have not been able to contain is rent. Rising rents amid falling sales threaten to undo all the good work we have done in growing this business from less than 20 employees to over 250 in the last 10 years. Surely something can be done on an emergency basis to suspend unreasonable increases being sought by landlords, availing of the patently flawed and biased towards landlord rent review mechanism. And finally, from my own county in Cork, from Keith Rogers, who's with Echo Shoes. We've been selling shoes in Ireland since 1916. We currently employ over 100 people. We are making huge efforts to make our business survive through this current downward period, but find the current rents and the upward-only clause in our leases is the single most biggest threat to our business. Last Concordia, it's no beyond argument that the commercial property is not a market, as I've stated. And what we actually have here is a situation where the opinion as presented in each of these emails, asks one single question. Do we invest in creating a sustainable labour and business market, or do we instead invest in an unsustainable property rental bubble? Now, in bringing forward this bill this evening, and in earlier debates with the Minister, a lot of toing and froing with regard to the legality and constitutionality of this matter has been discussed. In preparation of bringing this bill this evening, there are a number of considerations that the Labour Party took. And of course, any adaptations or changes with regard to property law must of course stand up to legal scrutiny. And as I said, in preparing this bill for this evening and what I present before the House on behalf of the Labour Party this evening, we sought such legal examination. And it is our legal advice that the bill is robust and will pass the legal challenge, whether it be in relation to constitutional matters, private property rights or contract law. What the bill seeks to address is the emergency that has arisen in relation to upward-only rent reviews and the substantial economic havoc that such provisions are causing, particularly to small and medium-sized enterprises where rent reviews, normally occurring every 5 years, are resulting in many companies having to be wound up, liquidators exercising special statutory powers to disclaim erroneous leases, and businesses effectively being abandoned, creating a substantial loss of employment, such as was exemplified in the emails I have read out earlier. The government's response to this has been twofold. One has been to set up a working group, and the other is to claim that there are legal obstacles prohibiting them from finding a solution. Ciaran Lynch, it would appear that this government is always one working group away from finding a solution. And whenever a difficulty is presented in this House, we hear a minister state that he's putting together a committee or a working report, and at some time in the future that will report back here to the House. In fact, I understand that this working group is to make its first report on the 30th of June, just before the Dáil goes into the summer recess, which coincidentally is almost a year to the day since the Minister first announced he was going to do something about the problem. It is the view of the Labour Party that the financial stress being placed upon the retail sector by upward-only rent reviews requires an immediate and urgent response, and struggling businesses cannot wait that long. They cannot wait till next week, Minister, let alone the 30th of June. The second matter regarding legal difficulties is one which was restated by the Taoiseach this afternoon in response to party leader Eamon Gilmore when he raised that matter with him. During that debate, Deputy Gilmore called upon the Taoiseach to lay the Attorney-General's advice before the House. I'd like to restate that request this evening. Precedent has already been set with regard to legal advice by the Attorney-General being set before the House. I believe Attorney-General Peter Sutherland done so on a previous occasion, given the significance and the national importance of that matter. And I believe that the opportunity now has been created, given the seriousness, the necessity and the grave consequences of the upward-only rent provision being in place, that it is now incumbent upon the Minister to lay that advice before the House. Now, in preparation for our own bill here this evening, Ciaran Lynch, we have drawn our own legal expertise and our own legal opinion on it. And I have noted that there have been other notable legal opinions offered in the media of late, which I'll make reference to in a moment. But the Labour Party are certainly in a position to lay our legal advice before the House in response to the Minister furnishing the Attorney-General's report. As I understand it, the Attorney-General is an appointee of the government. He or she, at any given moment in time, is somebody from the legal profession, somebody who is appropriately trained and whose opinion is valued and therefore hired by the government. But it should not be the case, or a message should not be sent out from this House, that the Attorney-General's view on any single matter is infallible. And the only way that the Attorney-General's view on this matter can be tested is by putting it into the public domain and letting it actually have full scrutiny. However, in the absence of the Attorney's advice, one can only assume that the government's that there is some reason for the government's resistance to supporting this bill this evening. One conclusion that could be drawn from a recent letter published by Professor Gwyn Morgan of University College Cork in the national newspapers last week, when he said, "No doubt, it is a happy coincidence that the establishment's view of things coincides with the interests of banks, which have advanced money to landlords to acquire premises on the basis of existing rent levels. The bank's interests would be damaged by a change which would reduce rents," end quotes. Further to this point by Professor Gwyn Morgan, and in relation to the working group set up by the Minister, is it also just a coincidence or a convenience that the timing of their report will be after the valuation of the NARMA portfolios have actually commenced, which I believe are to be undertaken in the next number of weeks? There is a tradition in this House, or as a new member of this House, I wouldn't call it a tradition, I'd probably call it a practice, that when ideas are brought forward by opposition, the default response from government is to oppose it. I had this in one of the earlier bills I dealt in this House, in a housing bill, where there was an obvious technical fault, where the Minister had cited the wrong year in the legislation. I, by amendment, cited the correct year. Yet, when I put it to a vote, the Minister actually voted against my amendment, and subsequently, at a later stage, came back with the same amendment that I had put in. Now, I don't know, maybe, yes, Prime Minister can maybe make some sense of that, and very brave Minister, very brave, but to me, that sort of carry on just beggars belief, and to the general public out there is just beyond common sense. The bill that the Labour Party are putting forward this evening, I would like the government to treat like any other bill. And it is my hope that the government will not oppose this bill when we go to a vote at 8:30 tomorrow evening. I would ask that the government would do what happens with every important piece of legislation, that they would let the bill proceed and at the later stages present their amendments to it, as is the proper keeping with legislation, and not just to arrive into a default position. So I would welcome a response from the Minister and his government that would actually take on board the intent of this bill to assist government to deal with an emergency situation that having such a significant, or is creating such a significant damage on the retail sector, that something can be done about it now, rather than waiting about a report sometime at the end of June. In conclusion, Lascom Corlin, as we debate the bill this evening, jobs are literally pouring out out of the retail sector, and this is due to overpriced and inflexible commercial rents. This evening, the government has an opportunity to show that it will put people and jobs first and make a real effort in reducing the live register. There's also an opportunity for the government to save itself a few bob. I read recently that and just give me one moment there, that the state now is one of the biggest renters of properties that are bound under the upward rent review provision. I understand that in Dublin, the state is paying 118 million euros per year on rental properties that are locked in to upward-only rent reviews. However, the state itself is also a landlord, and I believe one of the significant reasons that Use and Use actually closed was because it couldn't secure a rent reduction of any significance from the Dublin Airport Authority. I think at the last moment the Dublin Airport Authority came in with a proposal that they would reduce Use and Use lease rent by 1%. 1% at a retail rent that was set 5 years ago at the height of the property bubble. This is the sort of nonsense that is going on in government, and this is the sort of nonsense that the government is actually paying out on an annual basis. Coincidentally, that 118 euros that we're paying out is being paid out to some of the wealthiest people in the state. That include Larry Goodman, Liam Carroll, and even Anglo-Irish Bank, which I think we recently actually acquired. Now, if we can't work out a deal where Anglo-Irish Bank can reduce rents, where are we actually at? Thank you very much, Lascom Corlin. Lascom Corlin, the wholesale and retail sector was the largest employer sector of the Irish economy in 2009, where it employed just over 307,000 people. 1 year later, with nearly 30,000 jobs being lost in that sector alone, the situation is getting worse day by day. We have recently seen significant job losses in Arnott's, Debenhams, Super Quinn and Use and Use, all reputable companies, amongst many other retail employers in jeopardy due to unsustainable upward rent reviews. We are also witnessing a situation where employers are having their working week, or employees are having their working week reduced in order to compensate for the costs of an overvalued property bubble and rental bubble. This government needs to wake up to the fact that high rents are costing jobs, reducing both business and workers' incomes, and contributing to the stagnation of this economy. A commercial property market which has upward rent review clauses for existing businesses is unfair, unrealistic, and ultimately uncompetitive. Thank you.